of course, you are an artist arranger, but you started out in New York, I believe, as an arranger.
I did. That's what I wanted to do with my life. I arranged for every singer that wanted a piano player / arranger in New York for, say, about 4 years before I met Bet. So I was like hot. I was a hot accompanist, because, you know, accompanying and piano playing are two different things. And I have it down. I know how to accompany real well. I can't do flourishes and, you know, a lot of great piano playing, jazz playing, but I'm my own one-man band, and singers loved that. They loved to be able to be accompanied by this percussive keyboard guy. And then, of course, they'd hire me to write out whatever I came up with. I would write out for them, and little by little, I began to get to work. Well, the singers, you know, they were, it was theater people, it was cabaret people, it was nightclub people, duos, and girl singers and boy singers, and anybody who needed an arranger. It wasn't like, you know, I wasn't arranging for Peggy Lee yet, you know, I wasn't doing the big stuff yet, but I was, you know, I was doing all of the small stuff like that. I never even got into the studio stuff at that point until I started to arrange for Jingles. And that was a major lift up in my career.
Can you talk about a little bit about how, you know, arranging for Jingles is different than arranging a song?
Well, only because it's 30 seconds or a minute long. You know, Jingles are. I mean, first I would write them, and then I would arrange them. That's what I've always done with my career. I don't think I've ever, even for myself, I don't think I've ever made an album. I mean, I can count it on the fingers of one hand the songs that I did not lay out or begin the arrangement. Even when I worked with Johnny Mandel, I was right next to him, helping him to lay out the song the way I wanted it to be laid out. And then, of course, he did his genius, the genius from the rest of it, you know, the fistful of chords and, you know, wonderful sounding orchestrations and all. But what I love doing is laying it out. And that's what I did with these jingles. I would write the State Farm Insurance commercial, and then I would write out what they wanted. They would, you know, tell me it was going to be gentle, it was going to be a girl singer, and I would write out the oboe part, and, you know, the whole. Actually, I was actually doing the entire orchestrating and arrangements for those commercials for, you know, beers and Stridex and McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and, you know, all of that. That's what I was doing for years. I did that, not many years, but for years, and that paid handsomely.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Paid handsomely. And, you know, what I learned is how to be able to do that quickly, within a minute or 30 seconds, and there's a different sound to commercials. There's a commercial sound, and they ain't kidding. It's a commercial sound between the combination of the background singers and the chart itself. It's got to burst through two little tinny speakers and grab the listener's attention. So that's what I learned for those 3 or 4 years, how to do that, especially with engineers. Engineers really are different in the commercial world than they are in the recording world. And, you know, they know how to do this. They crank up the EQ or something, and it just bursts through the speakers. And a lot has to do with how you arrange the orchestra and how many times you double the vocalists and how many times you, you know, what echo you turn up on the various machines. I mean, it bursts through the television set. And when I got an opportunity to do my first record, that's what I walked into the recording studio knowing. I didn't know about classical music. I didn't know about legit stuff. I knew how to make a commercial. And so my first album was filled with all of those rules.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is evident in your pop hits that you've really one of the prime examples is one of the prime elements is dynamics. I mean, you use that a lot in Jingles, and you certainly use it a lot in your arrangements of your songs.
Well, those dynamics, the builds and the key changes and all of those tricks. I learned that from my parents' albums. They were very musical, my family, and my parents, Willie, my stepfather. And he brought into my life a stack of albums when they got married when I was 13 that changed my life. It was albums filled with, it was big bands, it was great vocalists like Sinatra and Garland, great Broadway show albums like The Most Happy Fella and Kismet, Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And, it rocked my world. I mean, my friends were all glued to Elvis and the doo-wop music of the day, and that wasn't doing anything for me. Four chords just didn't do it. I knew I was a musical guy, but nothing was turning me on until this man came into my life at the age of 13 with this stack of gold and actually turned my musical motor on. And one of the things I loved about these albums was I didn't know what the hell was moving ballad or the build of Sing, 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 Benny Goodman's thing, or the string section accompanying some great Sinatra, Only the Lonely thing. I didn't know what that was, but I needed to go and study that. And that's what I began to become obsessed about. The Beatles, George Martin, not the Beatles. Oh, the songwriting was great, but it was George Martin that I was fascinated with. How did he do that? Why did he choose a string quartet under Eleanor Rigby, and how did he write that? It was the piccolo trumpet, and whatever that song was, Penny Lane. And it was those moments that turned me on as a growing musician, and that's what affected me as an arranger and a producer.
So when you say you went to study it, can you talk a little bit about the studying side of that?
Well, studying, I just listened to it over and over again, memorized it, played it, copied it down. It was also another element that I always admired. It was a step before the orchestrator got it. It was the guy that laid it out. Sometimes they just took a great standard and somebody figured out how to flip it over into another way of doing it. We'd heard a great standard over and over again, and then somebody took this great standard and flipped it over and made it into another rendition of it. There was this guy in the MGM musicals named Roger Edens. Have you heard of Roger Edens?
I've heard the name, yeah.
And I always loved those old MGM musicals, and I can't figure out why I do. But I think it was because of Roger Edens. There were orchestrators after he got his hands on it, but he would take a standard like, But Not For Me or something, and he would twist it around and make it into, the chords would change a little, and it would go into a different, it just wasn't this plain old song. Somehow would wind up someplace different. I think that's the step that I really love best about arranging. That step about taking either an already written song or taking a song that I write and massaging it and giving it a shape. Then the next step is to orchestrate it and arrange it and add the violins and add the big backbeat and add the pianos and stuff. But the first step is to how do you want to render the song? I did it with Mandy. Mandy was a rock and roll song, very very up tempo, a lot of guitars, and the rendition that I did of Mandy is totally different. It's totally different than the original. But that's what I love doing. I took this big rock and roll song and I started it with a little piano and wound up at the top of the scale, singing the high note with the orchestra screaming at the end, That was the most fun. The most fun was to lay it out at first and to retain the integrity of the song, because I didn't change the plaintiveness of the song that the songwriter wrote. I would never tamper with that. But I found a different facet of the song, and that's the most fun for me.
Yeah, when I was talking to Richard Carpenter, one of the things which I sort of paralleled was the way that you build a ballad in the way that he sometimes would do that as well, like for instance with Ticket to Ride. I think there is a kind of a parallel in that the dramatic side of the way that you lay out a song. I think that also you were talking earlier about your love of musicals. I noticed in your biography that one of the first things you did when you were very young was you wrote a musical, which played for 6 years. Now, obviously, that seems to have very much influenced a lot of your arrangements of songs, the use of counterlines and the use of drama. You can pick any that you want to talk about in that way, but I think it's pretty clear, that musical side.
And, when I write also, I always write with that in mind, and that's why it always gets me in trouble with the commercial people, because they've always turned my stuff down. Clive and radio people, they always say it's too theatrical, or it's too sophisticated, or it's too this and too that. Sometimes I actually lucked into, this one's for you, and even now, and it's a miracle, and could it be magic? And, I've actually lucked into just a pop hit. Those are the hardest things for me to write, though. I mean, even now, I think half the fun of even now is in the chart. I mean, I love the songwriting. The lyric is beautiful. Marty wrote a beautiful lyric, and I thought the melody was really kind of catchy. But I think the whole fun of that one is in the build and the key change and the orchestration behind it. And that was my most fun, laying something like that out.
When you're laying it out, what do you generally sit at the piano? Do you have a little tape recorder next to you? What do you do?
I do sit at the piano. I have a tape recorder next to me. Write out the chart, I mean, like on the Sinatra album, Don Sebesky is one of my favorite all-time arrangers, but, I wind up trying to find these guys that I can communicate with, because I don't orchestrate anymore. It's just too time-consuming, and it's such an art. I was good at it when I was doing it for Bet and other singers, but it was, it's an art. It's a whole different way you do it. It's a whole different way of thinking. So all I can do is to give Don Sebesky, the melody lines of the horns that I want to start You Make Me Feel So Young with. The 3 times I want to change keys and how I want to end it. And I wrote it out, and I played it on a cassette, and he went, oh. And I made it in the studio, and it was fantastic. And I had all the stuff that I wanted in it, only he topped me and my ideas by miles. But it had all the stuff that I loved, all the build, everything that I wanted, and he just said, got it. And now, I don't know what Don would have given me had I not done that. It doesn't really matter. That's what I like to do.
Well, you've made it easy for him, because I know, from my point of view, if somebody can sit down at the piano or on the guitar and play me through their idea of the song,
right,
then I've got something really solid.
And then you could fly. Then you could go.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the very first thing I did for McCartney, it was kind of really daunting, because he just said, I want to do this tune. And I said, well, okay, great. And then he just said, well, I'll see you in the studio. And I said, but Paul, how do you want to do it? He says, any way you like. See you there. Bye. Wow. So that's much more daunting for an arranger. More.
I've never done that with an arranger, ever. And the one time I did it, I regretted it. I really regretted it, because it was nothing like I wanted it to be. And so how could I have asked him to read my mind? So I never did that again. I always give my arranger orchestrators every clue I can come up with, from writing it down, to actually singing it into the tape recorders, to actually doing most of the chart.
Do you? When you're laying it out, do you also write out a basic chord chart with a few lead lines for the guy?
Because I'm a chord change fanatic too.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. In fact, that's another interesting. It seems that you, obviously, because you have such a wide background in both jazz harmony and musicals, the whole world of Hollywood musicals, you're shoving that stuff in your music all the time.
All the time. And they don't know what it is. The audiences don't know what it is, and that's why I'm kind of lucky about melding this commercial world that I learned, in the beginning, with this legit Broadway, Nelson Riddle, David Rose influences. Put them all together and give it a big backbeat, and I don't know what the audiences think of it. I just know that if it works big time, because it's got all of the emotion and all of the musicality that I've always loved, and yet I was able to make Weekend in New England, which shouldn't be a hit record. It's a waltz, and it never says the title in the song. it shouldn't have been a hit record, but, you know, I was able to make a Aerosmith sounding record out of this, you know, this waltz, you know, and that was because I come from both sides of the fence.
Yeah, and it's also very much because of the arrangement. I mean, that song is just another example of the kind of terrace dynamics, you know, the sort of build to, and then that moment of silence, and then, you know, all hell breaks loose. And you do that a lot in your songs. I mean, was that a conscious thing from early on?
It just thrilled me. Yeah, I always do it, and I'm really great at putting things together. That's what I love. I just did it I'm on this tour in England now, and I'm closing the show with a song called Stars in the Night, which closes Harmony, this musical Harmony. In Harmony, we don't do it like this. It's, you know, right in Harmony, it's done by 6 guys. It's about 6 minutes. On my show, of course, I do it. The world comes in, the orchestra, you know, the choir of 300 people. And so the way I do it is I lay it out. I gave it to Jonathan Tunick to orchestrate, and then he did. And now I stand in the house and I say, could you play that horn line again? Could you take it down an octave? Could we change the ending a little bit? Can you cut the four? That's how I like to do it. I mean, I keep the orchestra, I torture everybody for hours. But what I finally get is what moves me. And that's what I do in the studio too, with the Weekend in New England and stuff like that. I would write it out. The orchestra would write it out. I'd stand behind the booth and in the booth, and I would say, "Could you just play that string line one more time?" And I would change it right there. It's like charts are us when you work with me. And then within 20 minutes, we got it. Everybody's got it. And by that time, it sounds at least the way I like it to sound. The drum breaks that you're describing, that's the way it happened in the studio.
Well, now, I think it's really relevant to talk about your new album in relation to arranging, because certainly on this album, you've done everything and you've done everything, because you've obviously, I would guess about 90% of it is programmed, obviously by you. Now, one of the questions which I've talked a lot to the other arrangers about is how technology has affected their work. Well, on this album, it seems to have affected a lot.
Yeah, I loved it. As an arranger, as you know, you can hear it before you make a fool out of yourself. In the studio, you can hear it before you have to, have it played by other instruments. Now you can actually hear the string line and whether it's working, whether it's moving you. I was able to do every single song like that. Although I must say that you can get very fooled by making your song sound so great and not having a very good song. So I have to write the song on an acoustic piano without the machines. And it has to work for me that way before I can turn it over to the machines and then arrange it. It still has to work as a song. Because, what I hear on the radio these days is great sounding grooves and records, but if you strip away the groove, you strip away all the sounds, you haven't got a song. There's no songs. There's no standards and classically written songs at all. They sound great, and you can really get fooled by doing it on your machines instead of just sitting at your guitar or playing it on your piano. And this album, I had to be able to play the whole album, all the songs on the album, on my piano before I would go to the machines.
What program do you use for sequencing?
Well, this took a little while. This album took about 10 years, off and on. I used Vision for a long time, and when Vision went out of business, I changed to Digital Performer, and I did just about everything in Digital Performer. It was really just amazing. I did all my vocals. I was my own engineer. I punched myself in. I did my own comps. And then when I was all done with the whole thing, I sent it to my wonderful engineer, co-producer, and he would take my sequences and vocals and, put them through the Cuisinarts or whatever they do there and make it sound great. And then I added a small string and horn section and Vinny Caduta on the drums.
Now, I notice the orchestration that you have on it, it is a small string section. Back in the sort of the big ballads, what kind of size string section were you using? Because on this one it was tiny.
Yeah, never big. I never went the way of the orchestra. I always fought the sound of this syrupy ballad crooner. I never made records like that, although, you know, many people think I probably do, or probably did. But if you listen to the old stuff that I did, it's never heavily string laden with, you know, huge orchestral. You know, Barbara Streisand makes these gorgeous sounding records with symphonic orchestras accompanying her, and they're fantastic. But I never ever did that. I always enjoyed having a little edge to my records and my songs. I always wanted more muscle than that, and so my string sections were never really huge.
But I mean, for instance, would you use, say, 20?
Maybe.
Yeah.
At the most. At the most.
Because that's what I use of preference, because I don't. Yeah, I think once you get more than that, playing becomes inaccurate.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever done a symphonic date, a symphony date?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I didn't enjoy my one. I only did one.
Neither did I. I hated the LSO. I hated the RPO. I hated working with those guys. Because also rhythmically, yeah,
this lumbering elephant of musicians.
That's right.
That I could not get. I couldn't get the edge out of them. I couldn't get they were never in tempo. You know, it was this huge elephant of musicians that I really didn't enjoy it. I really didn't enjoy it.
There's a famous English musician who once said, "Hey, could I have the strings and the cans a bit earlier, please?"
Really, isn't that the truth? Really?
But also, in terms of what you're talking about muscle, let's face it, an arranger writes for the voice that they're writing for. Now, your voice is, I mean, in terms of its timbre, is absolutely like a rock. I mean, it's a really strong, solid. It's not a soft kind of sound. It's a very solid, powerful tone. And
well,
so
maybe that's why I can't. You know, I feel comfortable with the gorgeousness, you know, of like a symphonic orchestra. It doesn't. When I'm revved up as a performer, when I'm ready to go, it doesn't feel good to have this beautiful cushion going on behind me. It feels much better to have a big, believe it or not, rock and roll band behind me. You know, even though like I said, I got one foot in one world and one foot in the other. I wanted to go back for a second, you know, and just to describe for one moment one of my all-time favorite things was taking Do You Want to Dance for Bet and making it into a ballad. I mean, I think that Mandy and Do You Want to Dance are the two real prime examples of what I love to do the most, which is to take, you know, a song that is known one way and to find something else in it. I made, you know, she is now singing Do You Want to Fuck, not Do You Want to Dance, you know? And that's what I thought was like a really great idea, you know? She's singing Do You Want to Go to Bed with Me instead of Do You Want to Dance? And that, I think, was a big surprise, to take that fun little, you know, boogie-woogie song, or, you know, little boogie song, and make it into a sexy song for her, you know. That was one of my all-time favorite things. Can
you take the listener through sort of your process in deconstructing and reconstructing that song?
She said, oh, give me one of those Laura Nero chords, Barry. You know, so I went, bang, bang, that was it, and it just kicked me right off into a ballad version of that thing.
So your new album, getting back to the kind of musical aspect of it, now, it obviously, I didn't get any other information or material with the record, but quite obviously, it's a stage musical.
Well, you know, all I really wanted to do on this new album was to write songs that were more interesting than your typical 32-bar love song. I didn't know how to make that album anymore. I didn't know how to make another one of those 10 songs of love songs without it being boring to myself. I mean, I'd done so many of them, and during those days, I had Clive Davis guiding me along, you know, giving me his input about what would make it on the radio and what would make it in the CD, you know, in the stores and all that stuff. This time I was on my own, and I just couldn't imagine making an album of 10 love songs or 10, you know, one up-tempo and one ballad, one up-tempo and one ballad. I mean, that's what everybody does. That's what I did. But given left to my own devices, nothing was turning me on. I mean, why would I buy that album? You know, the only reason I would buy this album is if it had a little bit more in it than just your typical 32-bar love song. So that's what turned me on about coming up with a little concept called the Mayflower. It's an apartment building that I grew up near, and writing about people's lives behind closed doors. That kind of turned me on. Not as a Broadway musical, and not as maybe as a review or something, but I really wanted it. I thought it was an interesting idea to hang a pop album on instead of just your typical love songs. And so I don't see it as a Broadway musical. I mean, I've been writing a few Broadway musicals, and I know what that is. Here at the Mayflower is not a Broadway musical. It's a review. You know, it could be done by a couple of different people because it does have a lot of characters in it, but it's not a Broadway musical. Take my word for it. It ain't a Broadway musical.
Well, I mean, you've got the characters and you've got some lovely stories and everything. And also the way that you've put it together, again, the way it's arranged and the way it's put together is, it lends itself to that dramatic sort of thing. And you've also used technology in a kind of an interesting way. And one of the things we've talked about is that technology is sort of part of the arrangement. Mm-hmm. And you've used effects on the voice. Mm-hmm. You've used other voices coming in, sort of spoken, dramatic voices. Was that always the plan from the start?
Yeah. So actually, the plan was even more elaborate than that. And then when I actually began to hear them, it didn't feel like a record. And I really wanted to stick to making a record and not making a libretto for a Broadway musical, you know, because I really didn't want to get myself in trouble, which I could have had I gone too far. This really is still a pop album. It's just got songs with a little more ideas in it than most songs are.
It suggests, though, I mean, obviously it suggests a story that isn't there.
Right.
But I mean...
You make up the story. I just wanted the listener to make up the story.
When you're doing, I mean, I haven't seen any of the videos for this, but are you going to be doing videos for this?
It depends on Sony. It depends on what happens with this album. It just came out today. You know what? Next week it enters at number 17, so that's good news.
Good.
That's good news.
We like that.
Yeah, I do.
I was just going to say, yeah, the videos, obviously, when you get around to doing that, you've got characters, you've got the setting, you've got, you know, right. So you may end up with a musical without wanting one.
Well, you know, that would be interesting. I mean, if there was a producer out there who wanted to do a review based on this, yeah, that would be interesting.
And you purposely used like a really small string section. It's, in fact, all the orchestration on it is almost what you'd find in the pit of an orchestra. Was that a conscious decision?
It was. I didn't want that big lumbering sound. Again, I think this album has got more of an edge than any of the other albums I've ever made. It's got a funk to it, believe it or not, you know, that I love. I mean, you know, my favorite bands are, you know, the Average White Band, and you know, those guys, you know, Sting, and they always have their edge to it, and that's where I was going. I wasn't going towards legit anything.
Is there a reason why you didn't play acoustic piano on some of the tracks? Because it sounds to me like it's like digital piano.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you chose.
Well, you know what? Well, that's when I say I turn around after I play it on my Yamaha grand piano that I have in my studio. I turn my back and I've got my computers looking at me, and that's how I programmed everything. That's how I programmed everything. And when I gave it to my engineer, that was what was on it. And that was me playing, and they did the best they could to make the digital piano sound like a legit piano sound. But you know, you can just go so far.
Yeah.
You know, they have this machine where it actually, and that's what they did on it, that actually plays an acoustic piano. It's like a player grand piano.
It goes under the strings.
Yeah, and that's what's playing. I mean, it's a real piano playing. It's not it's not my old Yamaha KX88. It's not that. It's not the Proteus. It's not the M1. It's none of that. It's a real Yamaha grand piano that, you know, it was like this piano on the other side of the glass booth, and it was playing there was my notes being played, you know, on the piano, and it sounded like a piano to me.
Also, the sound, if you know, just listening to all your stuff as I have been over the last couple of days, the sound of your vocal in terms of the way it's produced, the different reverbs that you use, the different types of delays.
Hardly any.
There's hardly any on this one, which is a much more modern sound.
Scary for somebody like me who's been like deluged, I mean, with echo and sound effects and stuff all of these years. But I liked it. It was scary for a while, and then I got used to it.
No, it works great. But, I mean, again, that's, in a way, the reverb or the lack of it is kind of part of the arrangement because it influences the sound of the record so much. Was that a conscious thing,
Yeah.
obviously, this time?
Yeah. My first instinct is to, give me a little of that stuff. And I kept being convinced by David Benson, my engineer, co-producer, and everybody around me, to just dry it up, and it'll be more real. And it is more real. I think, especially on an album like this. I mean, on the Sinatra album, the big band album, you want that Hollywood big band glamorous thing. But on this one, it really did help, I think, to dry it up and give it more of an edge.
When you're arranging, as you have in the past a lot for other singers, obviously the whole arrangement production changes depending on the singer that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give some examples of that?
Well, when I produced the Nancy Wilson album, you ever hear that one? It'll be your favorite album.
Okay, thank
You should get it. It's called With My Lover Beside Me. And it's about 10 songs that I wrote melodies to Johnny Mercer's lyrics. When he died, his widow gave me a whole stack of lyrics that no one had ever put music to, and that's where I got When October Goes from. I wrote When October Goes to one of those lyrics. Well, over the years, I was putting melodies to about 12 or 13 of them. They were beautiful lyrics, and I thought, these melodies were really great, but I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And I got a phone call from Nancy Wilson's record company, and they said, why don't you, do you have something? And I said, I think I've got like about 12 songs that she would sound great on. So Eddie Arkin, my co-producer at that time, and he's a wonderful arranger too, went into the studio with her, and so it's a long way to answer this question, but whatever I did for Nancy, I would never do for Bette. And whatever I did for Dion on that album, that had I'll Never Love This Way Again and Deja Vu and all, I would never do for Nancy. So yes, you do think differently. I mean, I become these singers. My next project, I'm producing and writing an album for Diane Schur. Diane Schur, the wonderful jazz singer. Now, we're writing songs that are tailor-made for her, and I'm sure when we get down to arranging it, it will be tailor-made arrangements for her voice. Every singer needs, tailor-made arrangements, and, when you listen to some singers, when they just have their, B-flat charts, I always think it's a crime that no one, really listened to their strong points or their weak points, and that the arranger didn't really know who he was arranging for.
Accentuate the positive.
Some singers can't hit those big notes at the end. Don't give that to them. And I've seen singers trying to do that and trying to compete with orchestras.
Exactly as you say, range comes into it a lot, doesn't it?
And emotion and style. Diane Schur, for instance, she can sing anything. Nancy Wilson has got a style all of her own. You want to accentuate what she does best, which is this sensual, sexy jazz singer. That's what we did on that album. And of course, Dion is the world's greatest pop singer. So you want to surround her with the world's greatest pop band.
One of the questions I'm asking all the arrangers is just for some quick arranging do's and don'ts. Do you have any?
Arranging do's and don'ts? Well, I guess my major caveat, my number one rule as an arranger, as a musician, but most of all as a person, is to make sure you're accompanying the lyric. It's the trick. It's the whole trick, is to crawl into the lyric as a human being. Start there, and then it'll tell you how to arrange the song.
That's a pretty good rule.
Yeah.
That's great.